27th of January in the year of 2022, Grant Cameron, Paul Hamden and Syann, and I was grateful to join in what is considered part one of this second part video, a discussion about communication through Paul and Syann from a race of Zeta beings. So if you are liking to catch up with that first part one interview, it's a little over an hour long. It can be found on my video, YouTube video account under my name, Walter Rucker. Feel free to access it there. And we're going to miss Grant Cameron today. Things didn't work out from the standpoint of timing, but I'm happy to have the opportunity to interview Paul and Syann myself here on this 12th of February, 2022 as well. How you guys doing today?
Yeah, good, thanks, Walter. Good, thanks. Yeah.
There is just a plethora of material that we could go over. Mm-hmm. And it's, if you look at Paul's work, along with co-author William Trury, there's thousands of pages of books that have been written. If anything, as accomplished as a medium, Paul is, and Syann is a developing medium, he may be a more accomplished author. And I really tell people that to get a full idea of what Paul is saying and what the Zeta race is bringing to us in the way of knowledge and what Syann is doing in her developing mediumship, it's a good idea to get some of that material under your belt. I guess the primary thing that you've put out, Paul, is a primer of the Zeta race. Is that correct?
Yeah. So that was well. So okay. So basically, the first book was called Alien Interaction, and I wrote that one. That's a lot of stuff that went on with me. And then I met up with William Trury, and he wanted to look at it from a scientific perspective as an ex-government scientist. And so he did that, and the primer of the Zeta race came out. It took a few years to get all that information together. The next one was the Zeta interviews, and we find that the Alien Interaction and the Zeta interviews are probably a more easier read. The primer of the Zeta race is based around a lot of science. Then I wrote a few more books, and then the last one that I've written was called The Zeta Mind, and that's a guide on how to actually contact extraterrestrials.
Yeah, that one's just coming out. Is that correct?
Yeah, that one has just come out. That's correct. Yeah.
Now, I always told you that I had a dog-eared copy of Alien Interactive Trilogy. This is my proof.
That's so funny. Look at it. Yeah.
Awesome.
That, so interesting. I read that book. It was my very first attempt at writing a book. I think I had a multitude of people trying to help me with the grammar and the commas and the spelling and everything. Because with ADHD, it's really difficult to do anything. Everything's backwards for me. So when I read that, I often think, oh yeah, that's right, that happened, or that happened, because it happened over such a large period of time that you quite often forget what happened to you. I mean, it's really difficult unless you, like I've done, journaled everything. So I've got a big database, and that database has everything in it that's all cross-referenced. Especially when the Zetas are speaking through me, they may say something now that was said 10 or 12, 15 years ago. Or somebody will say, oh, you said 15 years ago this. They'll say, we never said that. The specific words are, and they'll tell them exactly the words that were said. We go look it up, and there the words are in the database.
Well, you know, one of the things that was fun about reading the book is I bought 2 copies of Alien Trilogy, Interactive Trilogy. And the first copy was the one I showed you, was the one I carried with me and read at lunchtime, and I marked it up and inserted pronouns where there weren't pronouns. I cleaned up the language, and then I kind of went back to the beginning of the book and thought, wait a minute, maybe I'm not supposed to be doing that. All these pauses and all these lack of second copy and keep it clean. And it reads entirely different from my marked up copy, but I cherish both of them. They're fun reads.
Okay.
There's a question about healings that I've gotten from a number of people, and it's mostly about what kind of healings do the Zeta race like to be involved in, if they have a specific type of healing they like to do. Why is it that the Zetas will heal some people and others they seemingly pay no attention to? Is there a time limit for people in regards to an illness? Do you have to be shortly ill, or do you have to be long-term illness? And does that affect when the Zetas will or will not intervene?
Absolutely. So look, this was something that I struggled with as well, because you'd think that, they've got all this technology, they've got everything worked out, hopefully. And so they used to say, look, show us an image of the person. And then next thing I'd see a sign or a flash up from them saying that they would heal that specific person. Then somebody else would ask for healing, and I'd look at their picture and there'd be nothing. And I couldn't work out what was going on. And it was quite perplexing, because for me, I was thinking, if you've got technology, just heal everybody. That's the first thing. I think that's just what humans would expect. But what I found out was that they said that they would only heal their own. And I was meant to say, well, what does that mean? They said, well, there's a lot of the Zetas and other extraterrestrials living on planet in the human form. And they said that they generally only heal their own. And so every time I'd looked at these images, if they'd healed a person, because they knew that that person was a hybrid from an extraterrestrial race. And so it started to make sense about what they have parameters about what they will and won't do. And then the other parameter was, if a person is terminal and that within the 3-month period of that, they won't do anything. It doesn't matter whether they're a hybrid or not. Now, to me, I couldn't understand that, but then I realized that they have to metabolize themselves what the unwellness is. They don't call it illness, they call it unwellness. And if they have to metabolize that, then of course they don't want to be too close to termination themselves, or else they're going to have to jump to a new container because of that. So I really started to see that there was some specifics about this. And although I'd love to talk more publicly about some of the things that have happened with the healings and the many healings that the Zetas have done, not me and not Syann, but what the Zetas have done. And they do heal a lot of people. It's more about just being aware that they generally heal their own. Now, the only time we've seen them heal people that were not their own was we did a workshop in Sydney a few months ago, and they did you want to speak, actually, do you want to speak about that? Because I think it's probably better from an observer's perspective.
Yeah, okay. When we do the workshops, we don't set out to do healings.
No.
It's very much down to the energy of the place we're in and how stable the connection is for them. And so if they're going to do healings, they tell us there and then, and it all happens very naturally. It's not planned. On this particular occasion, we got the go-ahead to facilitate some healings, and they basically took over the room that we'd been using, where they had a good base of energy after several sittings. and they overlaid their own environment. I call it like a hospital environment, for lack of a better word. They overlaid that into the room that we were using. And so when we had 2 healing beds laid out and 2 people would come in at a time, they'd lay on the beds, we'd both go into trance to facilitate what they were doing. And we'd see, sometimes with our eyes open in an altered state, sometimes with our eyes closed, their technology appearing in the room in a
Coming down through the roof.
yeah, sort of like in an energetic or an etheric way, although we could still see it. It sounds a little bit interesting to explain, but that's the only way to explain it. And so, you know, people were,
and the people in the room could see it as well.
yeah, the people in the room could see it. So some on some occasions, these healings, we'd have the technology coming in. Some occasions we'd have the Zeta beings themselves actually coming in the room, walking around. And then other occasions, they must have, I don't know, they must have had a craft nearby above us. I don't know what the distance was, but on other occasions we'd have somebody sit bolt upright after the healing had finished. Yeah, I was on a craft, and I'd be able to say, yeah, I know, because I was there with you, because I'd seen absolutely everything that had taken place on board for the duration, including the leaving and the coming back again. So they work in whatever way they want to, but on that particular occasion, they actually offered the healings to anyone that wanted a healing. Just anybody. And I asked them about that, because that's not what they normally say. And they said to me, they have free will. That's what they chose to do on that occasion.
It sounds fantastical, you know, like that this would even take place. But I think the evidence is that the people that were there, actually, the Zetas healed them. And
some of them were healings that were instant, and then others evidenced themselves in the morning. So somebody came in with a particular condition, and then the next morning that condition had gone. And so, you know, with no medical explanation. So, you know, they're not insignificant healings. I mean, when they work like that.
You could say, oh, look, it's just the power of the mind, or, you know, the person never had that, this or that. You have to ask yourself, well, what's going on? And forget about me and Syann and the Zetas. What is going on? That's the real question. If there's technologies available, and even I would suggest that even humanity has some of these technologies, but they're not being released to the public. And, you know, that's not controversial in any way. I think we all know that there's some fairly advanced stuff out there that isn't being released to the public. So we have to ask ourselves what's going on, and what, like Tesla, I believe that Tesla actually invented some of this, or was thinking about, you know, developing some of this technology, especially in regards to the light bed technology.
When you say that the Zetas enter a human container, would take a place on our planet, what's the mechanism behind that? Do they transfer their whole consciousness into a human container? Do they transport just a part of it so that they can kind of be in 2 places at once? How's that work operation?
Yeah, good question. You can, as a human, leave your physical body and astral travel, move around, bilocate, wherever you need to do. The Zetas and other extraterrestrials can segment their consciousness, and then they can, after having permission to incarnate from the parents, of the human parents, they can incarnate as a child. They can still perform their own function in their own container on planet, and we've seen this often. That I'm not sure how to explain this, but we've seen that they will say that they are living the existence of 1 or 2 humans, but also living their own existence as well. That the most that we've seen that they can support is 3, themselves and 2 others at this point in time.
Themselves and 2 other human
containers? 2 humans and themselves on planet.
So they,
performing their own function.
so they split their consciousness into three parts.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. How often do you think that's happened? If I'm walking down the street,
Yeah.
you know, normal busy American street or Australia street, and I'm passing all these, you know, different people. Maybe I'll pass 1,000 people, you know, going to their lunch breaks or whatever. Yeah, just a random poll, what would you expect? The
I'd say
numbers,
300 of those people are hybrids.
defining hybrid as?
As a extraterrestrial consciousness that is existing in synchronous harmony or symbiotic relationship with a spirit consciousness. And this isn't what I'm saying. They've said that 30% of the human population are extraterrestrial. And that doesn't just mean that they're all totally extraterrestrial, because for the human form to be alive or enlivened, it has to have a spirit component. And that's why spirit realm is so critical and important to humanity. When the spirit leaves, the body no longer is active, but the body is no longer alive. And so the spirit is the animator of the physical form. But of course, consciousness can then also blend in from other races and provide that relationship where they provide a one mind.
There's a lot of conversation that centers around the fear of grays, Zeta beings in particular. And my understanding is that your approach and the approach that you would teach is one that you have to kind of stand in your own energy.
Yeah.
You have to understand that even though these are beings of highly advanced technology, highly advanced perhaps spiritualism, that nonetheless there still are equals, and it requires a commitment on a human individual's standpoint in order to have an interaction with these. Now, this interaction is complicated because of the frequency differences.
Yeah.
Much higher frequencies for extraterrestrials from us. Paul, you talk about when you do your Zeta settings that you often are physically burnt
Yes.
from those settings.
Yeah.
I guess that what I'm trying to get a handle on is that we are not in a state of frequency yet where we can have an interaction on a common and communal basis with these beings. I'd like to think we're getting there. And part of the way of getting there is to support physical mediumship like yours, Paul, and like you're saying. But this idea of standing in your own energy is a difficult thing to do when you're faced with an immediate flight and run response from the different frequency interchanges.
Yeah.
So I walk up on a Zeta being, or he walks up on me, there's going to be, in my case, regardless of what he looks like, whether I see him or not, but there's going to be such a frequency difference that it's going to initiate in my human mind a get out of there and move on kind of reaction. How do you make that work against standing your own energy?
To me, I think there's a saying that says something like, courage doesn't exist without fear. And if you have what the Zetas call strength of mind, and strength of mind comes through understanding who you are, understanding your own abilities, understanding your own stillness of mind. When these beings arrive, if you're able to stand in that power, they can acknowledge that. And when they observe you and you observe them, there will be a bilateral communication between you. You may be in fear, but the difference is rather than running, you stand and you just wait. And they don't want you to run, and they do not want you to be in any fear. But unfortunately, the history of contact or abduction and all of the stories around that provide people with a really intense pool of information. And when people read it about these contacts, these abductions, these craft, all these sorts of things, some people will go, I want to have that experience. And other people will be absolutely terrified to have that experience. But then we've got the other group, the actual people that are being abducted and the contactees. Now, we actually talk to a lot of people that have been taken, and for various reasons they are being taken. Quite often, they'll say, the first thing that happened was I picked up Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, and was looking at the cover, and that face triggered an event for me. Or I saw a picture of a grey and it triggered an event for me. And we start to think, well, you know, is that just conditioning? Is the person conditioned to believe that because they've seen it, they've heard about it? There's the historical information. There's some deep psychological issue. Or is this because the person's actually been taken, but they've got a screen memory, and now the screen memory is triggered because of the look? So the image. And so that takes a fair bit of discussion with a person without loading the conversation or preloading it. You don't want to preload somebody's communication. So we'll be talking to people and just listening to their story. You can just about tick off on a list what they're saying, and they'll think it's very innocuous. Oh, this happened, and then that happened, and of course, you know, they're telling us that they've never have been taken or never been abducted. And by the end of it, you're just sitting there and you're thinking, this is just a classic case of screen memory technology. But you can't say anything to them because that's their free will to acknowledge that they've had that sort of screen memory technology. Other people would say something like, you know, and what do you think? I'd say, well, if you go and do some research and have a look at some of the things that other people are saying, you may find some similarity there. Because this is what concerns me predominantly is that people would say, oh, okay, yeah, I think I'm an abductee. I had a dream. I think I'm an abductee. And then they go and get hypnotherapy, and then the subconscious just backfills all the information, and they were never taken in the first place. And that's, I think, the concern of a lot of the races as well. I mean, it's not that they don't do any harm by doing that, and they may actually, in some way, cause themselves to be contacted because of that. But it's all the misinformation that then comes from that. That person then builds around their story. They don't evidence their contact in any way. And then they put everything up as a fact, and they still have no evidence. And the fact is based in fear. So if you're saying, you know, that you've had a dream and that you've been contacted and, you know, you've backfilled through hypnotherapy, and next thing you're saying that, you know, extraterrestrials eat people, which is, we've heard this a few times, well, then that to me is very unhelpful. And I would suggest that unless you actually saw someone that happening to somebody, that it's very unhelpful. Okay. And this is, I mean, it's a little bit hypocritical, isn't it? Where you see humans eating animals continually all day, you know, not just one person, but I'm just saying, you know, that's the process that takes place. And then people lay that image over onto other races, and other races could be complete herbivores. You know, they're not even anywhere near eating meat or other beings or whatever. Look, there could be races out there that do that for sure, but it's just that there's a lot of danger, especially in what's taking place at the moment with the UAP disclosure. There's a lot of people coming forward, a lot of opinions coming forward, and in the abduction and contactee groups, people are saying, where have these people been for the last 30, 40, 50 years? We've never heard of them. Yeah. And all of a sudden, they're all out there talking as though they've actually had some contact, and they may or may not. I was watching one yesterday, an interview, And they were saying, oh, the person who's a scientist won't admit to some degree that they may have been taken, because if they did, that would then become the conversation rather than the science being the conversation.
Mhm.
And so it's really, unfortunately, the whole conversation is now becoming very diluted. I think it's lost direction. It started off with very good direction, but now it seems to be moving off into a plethora of different directions. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's just a problem.
Syann, what is going on with extraterrestrial females? We hear all this conversation about ET, and there seems to be, the majority of it seems to be about extraterrestrials being perceived as males. The Zetas, I know, recognize distinctness between themselves. I don't know if that distinctness is what we call male and female, but you know, you just don't see a whole lot of conversation about beings, extraterrestrial beings that are primarily considered to be, or we would at least consider to be, female in characteristics.
I guess it would depend on, as always, what race you're talking about. You know, I'm sure the Palladians are obviously overtly male and female, and I'm sure there are plenty of other races out there that have overtly male and female. And I know the Anunnaki have male and female. The Zeta, and I would have thought at least several other of the 63 races of the grey species, don't have any obvious gender. They appear genderless. So you couldn't really describe any one of them looking male or female. Yeah. Really.
Well, but not looking male or female, but do they have feminine and masculine characteristics?
Well, define characteristics. In their physical appearance, I'd say no. In their energy, though, I'd say that they would agree that there is a slight masculine or feminine.
There's capacity for that, but
yeah.
Avian races, Sirius A races, Sirius B races, Anunnaki, Palladian, Alpha Centurion. There's a lot of other races. They're all male and female.
Yeah.
But some races choose to be, and what is the word there for
androgynous?
Androgynous, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, but the interesting thing about the Zetas is this is a male and this is a female, and it's just a container with no sexual organs. They can actually swap over.
Yeah.
And then this female, which is denoted by consciousness, now the male then becomes the female consciousness and vice versa. You see, this is the thing, we assign sexuality via the physical body, but consciousness defines its own sexuality, doesn't it, really? And there isn't just one or the other. There are infinite types of sexuality.
I believe they told us only recently that if the couple, the pair, are separated and they have a child, that the one parent that's with the child is able to bring forward the male consciousness to the child. Yeah, so it's, you know, they can
just as a male would have male and female, the consciousness, and a female would also have female and male consciousness as a human. Just because you're a male doesn't mean that you don't have some part of feminine. And because you're a female, same. So with them, they're saying that if they need to bring forward a male in themselves, that they can do that. Just as a male can bring forward compassion and love, and you know, I mean, those specific characteristics obviously aren't just for one specific sex; they're across all sexes. But it depends what they're trying to teach the child at that point. That may require some level of cognizance in regards to that. I'm not sure. That's actually, that sounds like a pretty complicated subject.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I thought you handled it well.
We can only try.
You can only try. The something that I should have done at the beginning of this interview, which I think would have been a good forward to it, is to ask this question. And that is generally, what's it like being a Zeta in life? What are their cities like? What are they like? What's their biology? What's their education? You know, all of those things that we would consider making up a lifetime of human, you know, birth, parents, social pressures, all these things. What's it like from their side point? I mean, just start with their the places they inhabit. Are they living in skyscrapers? Are they living underground? Where are they?
So could you imagine an extraterrestrial comes to Earth and says to you, Walter, describe to me the human life, the human existence, and can you do it in 10 minutes?
Right.
You got no chance, right? So, okay, so some of the questions you asked, they're very interesting. So imagine that there's millions or trillions of beings and they're all living across planet and craft. If you live on a specific planet underground in a cavernous environment, then all of your technology is under there with you. That race would have one specific type of existence. Another race may be living on surface. And so they're which is also grey or Zeta. So their life is going to be different than the one on this planet. And then the other ones that are on craft or the motherships, they're going to be totally different. Now, generally, in what they do is they are assigned their mates via genetics. That's the first thing. So I've said this before, mother and father have a child, mother and father have a child. They then determine that the genetics of these two children are very much similar in regards to what type of role they may fulfill. They could be scientists, they could be building craft, they could be herbologists or plant specialists, they could be anything. And that's because they're acclimated towards that genetically, then they have much more desire to want to fulfill that role. They only need to sleep once a week, just as dolphins are able to sleep one half of their brain at a time. Zetas can do the same. They often talk to each other either telepathically or through a clicking process that's created in the cranial area. And so when people often have a contact with extraterrestrials or greys, they'll say that they hear clicking around them. And that's because when they're off planet or away from planet, the technology that enables the telepathic process is very, very limited. So that what they do is they've developed the communication process of clicking, and the clicking allows them to speak to each other quite clearly.
But not with their tongues.
But no, the clicking is not done with their tongues. It's an acoustic process that takes place. It can even be picked up on audio recordings as well if something running. So daily life of an extraterrestrial, depending on what you do, you know that your function today is to go and get down to the craft building area, and you've left your little domey type process that's built for the same frequency as you. And so when you go in, you're instantly refreshed. That's the first thing. Now, when you're in there, you look up on the monitor on the wall, and the monitor will say your allocation for your clear liquid today is this amount, and you go and rub it on your skin, and that's your nutrients for the day. And that technology is sensor driven, and it monitors the planet's capacity to produce enough resources for the race. So they're aiding the life of the planet rather than destroying it, unlike some other races as humans. Off to work, if we're going to use those words, possibly walking or jump on a conveyor system or go into this tubular system that they have that moves in and out. And before they enter the facility, they'll go through this another tube, and inside this tube is like an ultraviolet type process to disengage any bacteria that they have on their physical form. Go into the plant, wherever that is, and start working, doing your specific function. Now, there is no such thing as working 8-hour shifts. If your function requires that you're there for 3 to 5 to 6 days, you're there for that time. It socializing matter because, of course, you only need to sleep once a week. That would then bring up other issues about socializing, social aspects, those sorts of things. Remembering that the craft of biological entities, so they're being grown, there's a lot of work, it's a very, very busy hive of activity. If then, after that function had been performed, Zeta then wants to go and view or talk to other Zetas, there is a very, very large cavernous complex with a lot of technology. And if you stand up on one of the outer rails or the viewing areas, it looks like it's actually kilometers across, and it actually is. It's massive. And there's thousands and thousands of Zetas all down there. And this is their social interaction process. They have art, and the art is based in geometric shapes. They're able to build complicated geometric shapes. They have them in alcoves, and when you walk past them, they resonate a specific frequency, and you can blend into that frequency as well. Oh, you can talk about the lighting on the walls.
The walls glow. They don't have any lights. It's all very dim on when you're talking about the underground systems that they live in. I remember seeing I couldn't work out why the walls were glowing. Apparently, it's some form of biological entity rock that produces a luminescence, just very low luminescence.
We've got that on planet here, though.
Oh.
Yeah, plus we've got plankton that produces light as well.
Yeah. Oh, it's very, very nice.
And then, of course, the children, they go to school. And so I've attended school. Very interesting. It's this very, very big, large auditorium, lots of seating going up the back, and thousands and thousands of children. But interestingly, they don't have anything to write with. They don't need it. They don't have anything to.
They only have one teacher.
They only have one teacher. And so today's lesson could be on multidimensional gateways. I mean, what a school. And so I was taken down and asked to come down. I went down and was standing there. And this multidimensional gateway looked like a doorway. And it had undulating streams of distortions and colors. And they were teaching all of the children how humans are passed through this technology to get them onto craft. So you're asleep, and then you're taken on board craft. You've got to go through this undulating technology. It's a portal, and they were teaching them all the different nuances of how to control this technology so that the human's frequency taken from the bed into the craft is brought up to the correct frequency once they're in craft. And I thought to myself, this is just so amazing to be able to even be part of this, to even see this stuff.
Mm-hmm. How about reproduction? Do they reproduce?
Yeah, of course. So how do they reproduce? They use a maturation process. So just as in vitro fertilization process can be used on the planet here, you could take DNA, join the DNA together, create the child. The child's put into gestation process in a maturation chamber, and then after a few, I think it's a couple of months,
3 or 4 months.
3 or 4 months, the child actually steps out. I think they're about 4 or 5 sort of years old in height when that happens, and they're given some specific liquids for the first 3 days, and I believe it's by mouth that takes place. And then after that, they can move on to the paste, to the liquid. So there's a lot of technology involved in the creation of the containers and the creation of the children. There's also multiple methodologies for creating craft that way as well. So craft are also maturated in chambers as well.
You mentioned a term called the grid, and I kind of have a guesstimate of what you mean when you say that there are threads of information in the grid, that things are placed into a grid. Can you kind of bring that to a point of understanding? What are you talking about goes in the grid? What is the grid?
Yeah.
Why is it important to us? Can we recognize it? What do we do with this idea of the grid?
Now, I was asked that question the other day in one of our Zoom classes that we run, and I said, if we liken the grid to the Akashic records, and the Akashic records hold within it all information about everything, we've taken it a step further and talk about quanta. And of course, if I want to create a cup, then there needs to be some sort of a blueprint of how the cup should look. And so the grid holds all information in regards to what is possible, what can be created, and it may not even exist physically anywhere, but there's the potential for it to exist. And so when we understand that, then we can move into the grid and start to teach ourselves. We can move into these spaces. It's actually the only space where any being can enter. So we know about free will. We know that the extraterrestrials won't go into spirit realm. Spirit realm can't go to ET, all these sorts of things. But the grid is like a neutral knowledge base, and anybody can enter into that space and learn about all of the different technologies, all of the different things that can be created.
Sort of a central repository for knowledge of the universe?
Yeah, absolutely. But the grid is expansive right across from, well, not that, I was about to say from one side of the universe to the other, but you can say that because the universe sits in a void. And of course, that means that the universe has a finite edge that's undulating and always continuing and growing. So yes, from one side of the universe to the other.
Slipping back a little bit to what I guess would be the more common interpretation of who a gray being is. And rightfully or not, the grays are always, firstly, it seems, connected with the abduction scenario. And I'd like to ask a little bit about that, because there's some common things about those abduction scenarios and some common questions. And those questions would be things like, who gets taken and why does somebody else not get taken?
Yeah.
There's the commonality of scoop marking for abductions. Not all, but it seems like it comes up quite frequently. What is that about? There's always seems to be, and Grant Cameron pointed this out to me, always seems to be some type of orbing or orb relationship to abductions.
Yeah. Can I just answer those three questions?
Yeah, go. Yeah.
I think the first thing to say is that there are 63 races of the grey species. And that's the thing that is not generally understood.
And that's what causes a lot of the confusion.
Yeah.
Another thing is that there are beings like reptilians that are able to project imagery in front of them, and the person may believe that they're actually being taken by a grey, and there's no greys in the room. This is a pretty common deceptive technology that's used by those other races as well.
Well, I think it needs to say that 62 of those races all work together, but there is one race that doesn't. And we call them the abductors.
The abductors.
Now, that race is taking people it's a misinformed way. They're seeking consent from the people to take them, but they're not giving them the truth as to why they're taking them. And you know, that really, I believe, is the main cause of the fear-based.
And
reaction.
so, you know, when you ask who's taken and who's not taken, there's two areas here. We've got the people that are incarnated or, you know, hybrids, and if the perception is they're being taken, but they're actually being contacted, but it looks like they're being taken. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you do have humans that are being taken. They're being abducted, and they're being abducted by various races, and it's against their free will. Now, if the underlying law of the universe is that every being has free will, then we can start to understand why bad things happen to people, because it means that our free will is not being acknowledged. That's it. So that's very important to understand that.
Yeah.
The third question was, there's a lot of scoop marking and a lot of orbs that are part of the contact scenario. Why is that?
All right.
That
So
the scoop marking I kind of understand,
yeah.
but the orbing I don't.
Yeah, okay. So scoop marks, 70 years ago, scoop marks were really common because to align consciousness with cellular existence here in the physical, they needed to unfortunately take scoop skin and samples and do that. So most of us, including myself, we've got some wonderful scoop marks. Other people these days just have embedded technology which you implant. The extraterrestrials use orb technology to view, scan, to monitor hybrid activity. They also use orb technology to look at environments. Just as you could get a drone, go up and go around, they use orbs to do that as well. And because orbs are non-confrontational, I would suggest, humans would accept them so much more easier because people see orbs when spirit people come. And so we all love orbs. You know, we've had some orbs flying around the house the last 5 days.
Yep.
And one of them was as big as a basketball. Yep. And, you know, very non-confrontational. You notice one thing about orbs, they don't elicit any fear. They just...
Yeah.
And that's because they're designed that way. They do not hold the same frequency as would as an extraterrestrial form. And so they're just an inert technology that in regards to representation of energy, and they just have the capacity to be able to scan. But the other thing that people don't know about orbs is orbs are also like a portal that you can view through. So you can't view back, but you can view through them. And they have a very large facility where these technologies, the orb technologies, are linked to the facilities. And as the orbs move around, they can just look into these viewing portals and see directly through the orbs to wherever they are.
There's, well, that calls about 5,000 more questions, but let's move on a little bit. You and I were discussing within the last couple of days or so, participating in a CE5 contact event. And you said no, that wasn't something you'd be interested in. But nonetheless, there are quite a few CE5 folks out there making what they claim to be contact. And the question becomes not so much are they telling the truth or not, because unless you go and sit with them, you'll never know. But the bigger question is that really a legitimate protocol? In how much of that protocol, if it's legitimate, is insistence on something showing up, having a predetermined expectation that craft will show up?
So I guess the first thing we need to understand is that any protocol is only as good as the people that perform it. That's the first thing. If a person's very much a meditative state, or the group is very much able to join together in consensus reality, well, then of course, seeing these lights, you know, a long way away and all the rest of it, the perception is that it could be craft. And of course it can be craft. We often see lights ourselves flash up out in the sky. And, you know, if you jump onto your satellite navigation app on your phone, you can see that there was no satellite in that direction at that point in time. But of course, we know that the phenomenon, or this planet, has the capacity to actually build phenomenon as well. And the phenomenon is based in consciousness. So you could also argue that if a group of people get together and build a consensus reality for vectoring in craft, to see those craft, that they're actually creating the phenomenon themselves. That's So for me, the reason I don't get involved in CE5 much at all is because I would prefer to have contact. To me, it's okay to have the flashing lights. We all love that. But I would prefer to have the actual contact with the race. You know, I don't want to go out there and be standing there pointing laser beams at craft, but and those craft actually are consciousness. This is the other thing, you know about the CE5 protocols, that they're interacting with craft that have got a consciousness, and the craft need or must have a desire to want to show themselves as well. So I know that many people are doing it. And look, for those people, it's a good way for them to get evidence about craft. But the opposite applies. You've also got to ask yourself, is it what they think it is? And how are they going to evidence that? Because it's so far away, it could be a lot of things. And this is why, if you really think about it, it would be better to ask the craft once you've done coming closer, coming close enough so that everybody could visually see the craft. And then that would be more of an evidence-based process.
Yeah, and that's the big problem with most of the CE5 stuff. Is it, you get a lot of narrative, but you don't get much evidential information from them. And I certainly don't wish to disrespect any of the folks that are involved in CE5, because a lot of uninitiated and newly initiated people find that very fascinating. And there was a time that many years ago that I found myself all the way across the country to do a CE5 with my son.
As I was saying, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, Syann and I often go outside and look into the sky, and we were privileged to be asked to go to an Indigenous circle outside under the stars when the planets were aligning. Everybody had to hold a talking mechanism, a stick, and talk about themselves. When it was my turn, I just turned around and pointed at the sky, and a massive flash came up, and everybody saw it. To me, that was a craft initiating contact with everybody that was there. Now, we didn't perform any process to take place. It was just that they were wanting to acknowledge that we were acknowledging them as well.
Yeah.
That's all it was.
Well, we're coming up on an hour here, and I've got another 5 hours worth of questions left, so we're going to have to do a part 3 and a part 4 on this. If we can do that, we have some shorts that we need to do and the like, but why don't we call it a wrap for now before we lose our entire audience. Paul, you've got the handle on this, and send it on to me when you want to put it up. Syann, it's always great to see you, and thank you for both of you for your time. It's fascinating stuff. It's a new approach. It's something that requires effort to understand. And I think that there are more and more people who are out there listening to this particular video cast, and will listen to yours information and read your information in the future, that are going to find that it's well worth a while to spend the time to get to understand and get to dig into the details of some of the conversations that we had tonight, the books that you have out, and y'all's partnership. So thanks very much, guys.
That's okay. We really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
It was great. I enjoyed it too. Because if it's not fun, don't do it.
Okay. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.